Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, What MEP Contractors Need to Know for Better Collaboration. My name is Alyssa Chardier, and I'm pleased to be your moderator today. This webinar is brought to you by Applied Software. We're just going to go through a few housekeeping items before we get started with Matt Dillon, our presenter today. Don't forget to check out your console below for anything that you might need. It will have links to resources such as MEP Force signups in 2020, ebooks, blogs, all of that great stuff. So make sure to familiarize yourself with that control console. We also have a Q&A widget. Please make sure to type in questions throughout the presentation, and Matt and I will get to those in the middle or at the end. And before we get started, I'm going to introduce Matt, and we're going to start with a poll question. Matt, hi, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Alyssa. How are you?
Doing great. The poll question we're starting out with is, are you currently sharing data with people outside your firm? Matt, what do you most commonly see as the answer to that question? Or how are you currently sharing?
Well, BIM 360 aside, typically I normally see Dropbox is commonly used or something similar. Some SharePoint, OneDrive stuff. Still, a lot of people using FTP sites. Those three predominantly. If I guess I'd narrow it down to one, I'd say Dropbox.
Okay.
The most predominant.
All right. We're going to go ahead and push those poll questions through. It looks like we're seeing a lot of FTP and a lot of Dropbox, so pretty consistent. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, everybody. Before I get started on the agenda, I just want to reiterate what Alyssa said about asking questions. If you have questions, don't wait till the end. Go ahead and type them in when they come into your head, and we may not address them until after the webinar, but go ahead and type them before you forget them. So with that said, let me just kind of give you a brief overview of what I'm going to talk about it, and then we'll just launch right into it. We're going to do a real quick overview of what Worksharing is in Revit. I find that sometimes people are not fully up to speed on what that is, and since that's a big part of BIM 360 design, we need to make sure that everybody understands how that works traditionally before we launch into cloud-based Worksharing. Give you a really, really brief history lesson on how we got where we are today, and then talk about, from that, a comparison between current generation, or what we call second generation BIM 360 design versus the older BIM 360 team, and how that may or may not impact you. And then a little bit deeper dive into what BIM 360 design really is, how it fits into the whole BIM 360 ecosystem. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about how to go about setting up a BIM 360 design project. Quick overview of what Revit Cloud collaboration is as opposed to local work sharing, and then spend some time talking about the design collaboration workflow. Really the meat of BIM 360 design, aside from cloud collaboration, is this whole workflow that is enabled when you're using that product. We'll wrap it up with some troubleshooting tips, common causes of problems that we see people having, and good news, they're usually relatively easy to overcome. So with that, let me go ahead and move on. So Worksharing, if you're not familiar with how this works, and again, this is just an overview, but basically the idea is, a Revit project is typically all encapsulated in one file, at least for your discipline. So if you're an MEP engineer or a contractor, whatever you're doing for that project is probably going to be in a single file as opposed to being distributed amongst multiple drawing files. We cannot get around the fact, though, that Windows will not allow more than one person to work on a file at one time. There's nothing magical about Revit that prevents that from happening. So we have to find some other way of allowing multiple people to work on that project. And the way we do it is with this work-sharing concept, where you have a central file that sits on the file server, and that is your project. but nobody typically works directly in that central file. Instead, everybody has their own local file on their own workstation that they work in, and that local file is constantly communicating with the central file and synchronizing your work. So if you've ever been in an office where people are using Worksharing, you may have heard people say, hey, I need you to sync to central or something like that. What that means is they're saving their changes to the central file and also downloading changes that have been saved by others since they last synchronized. So it keeps the local file and the central file in synchronization, but the central file is really your project. Your local files are really just kind of your way of accessing that project. So that's how it's traditionally worked for years. Local file server, everybody's happy, no problems. However, over time, people started having the need to collaborate with people outside of their office. Either they were working in a geographically dispersed organization where you might be behind the same firewall, but you're in different physical locations and trying to collaborate across a WAN, a wide area network. And Worksharing really doesn't do too well there. There's too much latency on the networks, and you lose data. If at the very least, it just takes forever to do any kind of a synchronization operation. And then even worse, if you're trying to collaborate with someone who's not part of your organization, you really don't necessarily want to let them behind your firewall. Therefore, they don't even have any access to your central file if it's hosted on one of your file servers. So this was an issue for several years, and there were a lot of ways that people addressed it. There's Revit server out there for the WAN issue. And there were third-party services and products to allow you to host a project virtually in the cloud. The problem with those solutions were that they were expensive, both Revit server and the cloud-based kind of virtual environment solutions were expensive in various ways. Revit server itself is free. The technology, it comes with Revit, but you're still going to need a lot of hardware and a lot of IT resources to manage it. And again, it doesn't really address the issue of when you have people outside of your firewall. The virtual environment solutions, which essentially hosted a Revit project in the cloud along with your Revit session. Essentially with those solutions, we were working with a virtual terminal and everything was really happening in the cloud. All of the processing was happening in the cloud. Again, very expensive to maintain and took a lot of hardware resources as well as IT resources to keep it going. So in 2015, January of 2015, Autodesk released the A360 Cloud Collaboration for Revit, or C4R service, as we like to call it, which came with BIM 360 Team, which was the browser-based interface for that. This actually did resolve the issue of both, working across a WAN in the same organization or simply needing to host a project in the cloud. It took away the IT resources that you needed to maintain those other systems, and there's no additional hardware. You just need a good internet connection. So that was a big jump forward. However, in April of 2018, so not quite 2 years ago, BIM 360 Design was released. So this was the second generation product, which essentially replaces BIM 360 Team. So at that point in April of 2018, it was no longer possible to purchase BIM 360 Team. You purchased BIM 360 Design instead. And along with that, they released an update to Revit for compatibility with BIM 360 Design 2018.3. So that's kind of what happened in April. And at that point, there was a lot of confusion as to what was going to happen to people that had ongoing projects in earlier versions of Revit in BIM 360 Team in C4R. If it's not available anymore, what's going to happen to my projects? Well, it turned out not to be that big of a deal. Essentially, if you were an existing BIM 360 Team and C4R user on that date, you still had access to the same data that you had before in the same way. However, you also then had access to BIM 360 Design. Essentially, what happened was people received emails to invite them to go activate their BIM 360 Design account. No additional charge. New customers could only purchase BIM 360 Design. However, when you purchase BIM 360 Design, it does include access and entitlement to BIM 360 Teen as well. So if you need to work in a project that is older than Revit 2018.3, you can still use BIM 360 Teen. It's just included with BIM 360 Design. So essentially what it boils down to is what version of Revit are you using? If you're using Revit 2018.2 or previous, you got to run it in BIM 360 Teen in the old C4R. If you're using 2018.3 or actually if you're using 2018.3, you have a choice, and I'll show you what that looks like here in a minute. You can choose to use either BIM 360 Teen or BIM 360 Design. And then if you're running 2019 or later, it's BIM 360 Design only. So that's really what it boils down to. One thing to be aware of, if you are an existing BIM 360 Teen customer and you're using the Revit, the communicator, which is sort of a built-in instant messaging system for BIM 360 projects, that is no longer available with BIM 360 Design. And from what I understand, the reason that they had to take it away was it violated some of the privacy protocols in the EU. And they just decided it was better just to do away with it and let you rely on other instant messaging platforms if you need to use some sort of IM system with your BIM project. So that's really the only downside to going to BIM 360 Design, if you want to call it that. So what is BIM 360 Design? How does it fit into the larger scheme of things? And this slide looks kind of complicated, but let me try to break it down for you. Essentially, everything plugs into these three elements down here at the bottom of the slide. So the document management module, which is basically where the files are stored, and there's a ton of other functionality there, markups, issues, reviews, that kind of thing. The project homepage, various reports and dashboards, and then, of course, all of your account administration functions and everything. Those are actually all part of or consist, or what BIM 360 Docs consists of. So these three things here, the foundation for everything else that's in BIM 360 is really BIM 360 Docs. So if you were someone who just needed to do markups and view documents without actually editing them, you could just get an entitlement to BIM 360 Docs and have access to all of this. If you're running further down the chain, further down, say, the process of the BIM process, more into the construction side, as you start moving more toward construction, you might be looking at this pre-construction bundle, the BIM 360 Coordinate bundle, which includes things like model coordination, BIM 360 Glue, primarily for clash detection, but again, is built on BIM 360 Docs. So all of these other bundles includes Docs. So whatever you're looking at here or here, you're also getting this. Well, what we're talking about today is BIM 360 Design. So BIM 360 Design includes the Design Collaboration module, which I'll be showing you. It also includes the Revit Cloud Worksharing, which is what allows you to work in a Revit project that's hosted in the cloud. And it includes the older C4R and BIM 360 Teen, as I said previously. And of course, it's all built on the document management stuff, so it includes everything that's included in BIM 360 Docs. That's essentially what BIM 360 Design brings to the table. Okay, so let's do a real quick comparison. Why did they choose to do this? Why did they retire BIM 360 Teen and choose to go to BIM 360 Design? Well, first thing is permissions. BIM 360 Teen was what we called a high-trust environment, meaning if you invited someone to a BIM 360 Teen project, and they had the permission level, or I guess the role that allowed them to edit a Revit project, then they had full access to everything in that project. Every file in that project was fully exposed to everybody that had edit permissions on anything in that project. So essentially, once you were invited to a BIM 360 Teen project, you had the keys to the kingdom. Some people like to work that way, and you can still work that way in BIM 360 Design, but a lot of people didn't want to open up the doors to everybody for everything. And so with BIM 360 Design, you now have the ability to set permissions for folders. So you can say, okay, well, this group of people has access to this folder, but not these folders here, and vice versa. So much more control as to who gets access to what when with BIM 360 Design. Another difference is notifications. Very minimal notifications with BIM 360 Team. And by that I mean, if you do something like a markup or something, it's very difficult to notify somebody automatically. You have to send them an email, say, hey, there's some markups in BIM 360 Team for this document. Go take a look at it, whatever. With BIM 360 Design, there are several notifications, but most notably, you can create what's called an issue, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. It's part of the BIM 360 document management functionality. And an issue, when you create it, can include a markup for a document. But when you create that issue, you assign it to someone, and that person gets an email with a link to that issue, takes them right to it. And you can track activity so you can see who's doing what on that issue and what its status is. BIM 360 Team, like other BIM 360 first generation products, was standalone. There's no connection at all to BIM 360 docs. So if you were working on a Revit project and you needed to share it with somebody who only had the document management functionality, you literally had to copy that data into that BIM 360 docs project. There was no connection between Team and docs. BIM 360 Design, on the other hand, since it's built on top of docs, is fully integrated with BIM 360 document management. You don't have to copy anything around. And then finally, again, going back to the permissions, when you shared something in BIM 360 Team, it was shared with everybody. They had access to it whether they wanted it or not. So for example, let's say you're an architect and you published a new version of your architectural model. Well, if I'm an MEP, if there's an MEP engineer that has that model linked into their cloud model, that link is automatically going to update. Now, you may want that, but you may not want that. Sometimes you're not quite ready for those changes yet, and you want to control when your data updates. There was no such thing in BIM 360 Team, but with BIM 360 Design and the design collaboration workflow and the permissions, you have full control over when you share data with others, when it's exposed to others, and on the other end, people have full control over when they consume that data once it is shared. And we'll get into that here in just a minute with the design collaboration workflow. So here's what the cloud collaboration looks like when you initialize a central model in the cloud. So when you first decide that you want to share a central model in the cloud and have people start to work on it, this is what it's going to look like depending on what version you're using. So in all the versions, you'll go up here and hit the Collaborate button. And then if you're in Revit 2018.2 or previous, it just says Collaborate using the cloud. That is BIM 360 Team C4R, okay? Or, of course, traditional collaboration on your network. Revit 2018.3 gives you the option of BIM 360 Team or BIM 360 Document Management, Translation, BIM 360 Design. So this is your choice here. First generation, second generation. And frankly, I don't see any reason why anybody that had a choice would go with the first generation option. Revit 2019 and later, of course, your only option if you're going to go cloud is BIM 360 Document Management, in other words, BIM 360 Design. So here's how we go about setting up a project in BIM 360 Design. First off, you have to be a BIM 360 account or site administrator. Those two words are interchangeable, so when you see the word site or you see the word account, they mean the same thing. It really refers to a tenant site, what we used to refer to as a hub in BIM 360 Team, and it's simply the web address where all of your projects are located. You need to be an administrator for your tenant site to set up a project. And the first step, once you create a new project, is just to give it the basic information. Excuse me. Items with an asterisk are required information, and I believe the project value is no longer required. These slides are a little bit dated, and Autodesk is kind of tweaking these services constantly. You'll log in sometimes, and there'll be a little dialogue that comes up. Hey, we've added this, we've changed this. It's usually relatively minor. It's not a whole lot of stuff to digest at one time, but they are constantly making changes and adjustments and improvements. So I think one of the things that changed was this project value is no longer a required value or required input. It doesn't matter. I mean, you could put in anything here, and you can always come back and edit this information. If you don't know the answer right away, fine, go ahead and put a placeholder value. You can come back and modify it later when that information is known. But you put in the basic information here. And then probably the most important part of setting up a project is enabling the services. And so when you set up a project, depending on what your tenant site has activated for it, so whichever of those bundles and services you have purchased, you will see them available here for activation. Now, in this example, this tenant site only has the document management and BIM and the design collaboration services available. This is a typical scenario for someone who's just purchased BIM 360 Design and nothing else. You'll see these two services available. You want to activate both of them. There is absolutely no reason to activate one without activating the other. You're not saving yourself any money by not activating one. You're not consuming any additional licenses by activating design collaboration. It's all bundled together. So go ahead and activate both of them. And when you activate, what you're essentially doing is you're assigning a administrator for that particular service. I would recommend that you have 2 overall project administrators. So when you're setting up the project, when you're adding members to the project, we'll get to that in a minute, you definitely want to have at least 2 people assigned an administrator role. You at least need 1 person for backup, right? Same thing with the services. Frequently, the services administrators are the same people as the project administrators. They don't have to be, but just make sure you've got 2 of them, at least 2. So once you've enabled the services, then you start inviting your project members. And when you invite a project member, I don't know how visible this is on the screen, but notice when you invite a project member, you not only invite the member by email, but you also assign them to a company and assign a role. Very important that you do this. And I don't think you can even get through this without assigning them a company. But this actually helps you later on in the setup process by giving them a company assignment and a role. Notice over here also on the right side, this is where I'm giving them access to the design collaboration service and the document management service. Again, you can turn that off. I could click this little icon there and that would take that service away from them. But if I do that, they can't use any of the BIM 360 design functionality, and there's no reason to do that. Okay, go ahead and give it to them. This is the default, right? It wants to enable it for everybody. You can also make them a project admin just by clicking on that little button there. Okay, once you've added members, then you need to set up your teams. Now, this is actually done in the project administration screen, and I'll show you what that looks like here in just a minute, but you need to set up the teams for design collaboration. This is pretty straightforward. Most people will set up teams based on a company, based on a discipline, based on a role. I typically do it based on discipline. So I'll have an architectural team, I'll have an MEP team, I might have a piping subcontractor or fabricator team, structural engineers team, etc. And what's nice is you can manage these teams, again, by using the companies or the roles. So yes, you can assign a specific person to a team, or you can say everybody for XYZ Architects is a member of this team. Therefore, anybody who you've invited to the project that's a member of that company automatically is a member of the team and has whatever permission levels you set by default for that company. But again, you can edit individuals to give them a different level of permissions for this team. Now, again, view and edit is what you're going to need to actually work in a Revit project. Then this person here has share permissions as well to allow them to share data with other teams. We'll get more into that in just a minute. Okay, so this is what it looks like in the project admin screen. And if you've never been into BIM 360 before, this button right up here, there's this little, one of my coworkers calls it the waffle menu, but this is where you navigate through the various services that you have. So design collaboration, model coordination, document management, in this case, project admin. You just click on this guy and choose the service that you want to go to. So here you see I'm in project admin. I'm configuring the design collaboration service. So I've chosen project admin, services, and then design collaboration, and then just added my teams. Okay? And then when you add a team, so in this example, I've added a team, architects, and what actually happens in the document management service is these folders are created automatically. So this folder here, Architects, and its subfolders belong to this team. And if I don't do anything differently, other teams won't even see this folder. Now, I can change that. I can override it and say, well, you know what, give the other teams view permissions. Maybe I can let them see what's there but not do anything with it. Or just leave it so they have no visibility at all. Also, there's a shared folder that's created, and each team will have its own subfolder under the shared folder. We'll get into what that does in just a minute. But again, setting up these teams, if you let document management do it, will automatically create these folders in the default permission levels for them. It really streamlines the process. And again, if you're using the companies and the roles, you can really get through this pretty quickly. You have total flexibility. You can set up your own folder structure if you want. But myself, I'm a fan of letting the software automate it wherever possible. I'm lazy. I don't like to do work, so let the software do it. Okay, so before we get into what the design collaboration component, again, now you see we've gone to that service here, what that actually does and how that workflow works, let's talk about the interface here a little bit and some terms. So when you're in the design collaboration service, you're really not looking at folders. You're just looking at your team's data, and you're looking at it in a different way than what you might normally look at, say, in a file explorer or in document management or something. And there's some terms you need to be aware of. First off, the swim lanes. That's this area right up here. The swim lanes basically show you what your team and other teams have done as far as sharing and consuming data, right? So in this example, I can see that one of the other teams, I'm in here as an architect, and I've done quite a bit of things with my data. These are all periods when I have shared data with other teams, each one of these little dots. And here's a dot that says one of the other teams has also shared data, and it's available for you, and it may or may not have been consumed yet. That's the swim lanes. This is where you can see the activity, and it's all based on time. So this is earlier in the project. Obviously, this is later in the project. Now, a package is essentially something that can be shared. Packages are created in the design collaboration module, and they typically will consist of the model itself, the Revit model, and then any views or what we call viewables that you choose to make a part of that package. So it can include the model as well as specific views of that model for viewing in BIM 360. You define what that package is, and once the package is defined, then you can choose to share it with other teams. So until you share, all of this stuff happens inside your team. Other teams don't necessarily see it unless you want them to. But once you share a package, then other teams have access to it, and they can then consume those packages if they choose. So some critical terms here to be aware of. So let's go through how the workflow works. Now, I need to apologize a little bit here. Normally, I like to demonstrate things like this live. I don't do a live demonstration in this presentation simply because a lot of what happens here when you kick off an event in BIM 360 Design, it takes a couple, 3 minutes for it to actually process that so she can move to the next step. In the normal course of a project, it's no big deal. That 2 or 3 minutes is nothing to worry. It doesn't. You probably won't even notice it for the most part. But in the course of a demo, it tends to make things drag on a little bit while we sit here and watch the little circle spin around. So I'm going to be showing you a lot of screenshots of what this looks like and talking about how this flow works, but I won't be doing an actual live demonstration. Okay, so the first step in sharing data is to publish from Revit. So publishing is a really big thing. You're working in the Revit project. You need to publish that information to make it available to be shared. Now, what that actually looks like is here. And there's a variety of ways of publishing. I'm showing you one way here. But the first step in publishing is in the Revit project itself, you need to go to your publish settings, and this is on the Collaborate ribbon, and you want to create at least one set. Now, you can publish multiple sets. Sets are nothing more than a collection of views. So this set 1 is going to include these views. I could also include another set that had different views for different purposes and publish them all at the same time. Once you have published, or once you have defined your published sets, you need to synchronize with the central file. Because until you do that, that's all saved with the project. And until you've done that, until you've done the synchronize, it hasn't really been saved to the project. Once you've synchronized to the central file, then you can publish the data, and you can do it from right inside of Revit using this Manage Cloud Models tool. You'll see here, this file here is ready to be published. That's what that little icon indicates. You can also do it from outside of Revit in the Revit home screen. There's an option when you're looking at your cloud models to publish those and update them to the latest version. And you can even do it from within BIM 360 Design itself. You can be in the document management module, look at a file in the projects folders that you're working in and say, update this to the latest version as well. And it'll look at what these published settings were that were stored with that file, take those views and update those along with the model to the latest version. It's very, very important to publish, whether you're going to share or not, because what that does is it increments what you're seeing in the browser to the next version. If you don't publish, what you see in the browser will never change, no matter what you're doing to that project. Okay, here's what that kind of looks like. When you first upload your project, when you first initialize cloud collaboration in a project, it goes to version 2 in the document management module. So here I'm in document management, I'm in my architects folder, and I see it's at version 2. That tells me that's actually the very first published version of that model. I don't know where a version 1 is here. I've never seen a version 1 in this particular location, but version 2 is the first version in reality. And so it might look like this. But very, very important to note here is when you're synchronizing to the central file, this is not updating. Right? So there's actually two files. There's the viewable, what's been published, and there's the live model that people are actually working on, and that's not exposed in BIM 360. And it makes sense because if you think about it, how many times are people synchronizing in the course of a day? Maybe 100, maybe more. You don't want, 100 different versions of that thing in one day. So you want to control when you increment the version, and that's when you publish. So again, that active Revit model is hidden from view, and then the only views that are published are those that you specify when you define those sets. So it's very important to pay attention. What views am I going to publish, and then make sure you do publish on a regular basis. I would recommend doing it once a day, and the reason for that is those previous versions are your backups. So when you publish, all those user-specified views and sheets and everything are published along with it, and the version that you see increments now to version 3, version 2 is still there. You can access version 2. You can literally click on the version number here, and it'll show you the previous versions, and you can promote a previous version to be current in the unlikely and hopefully very rare occurrence of any corrupted data. You've got a backup, and this is where your backups are, is by publishing. Okay? So very important. Even if you don't intend to share the data yet, go ahead and publish once a day at least. But when you do publish, again, the browser increments to the next version, and then you can create a package. So that would be the next step, is to go ahead and create a package if you're intending to share it. If you're not intending to share it, no need to create a package. To create a package, you're going to be in the Design Collaboration module, and you simply click the plus sign on the end of your swim lane. So in this case, again, I'm an architect. I'm clicking the plus sign here to create a new package to share with the other teams. I go ahead and choose the set. This is the same set that we saw on the previous screen that was published. So I'll go ahead and choose that and save it, and I'll see this on my swim lane, which indicates to me there's a package that I have created that has not yet been shared with other teams. So now that the package is created, I can then share it. And that's usually done right after you create the package. Just create the package, save it, and share it. And when you share the package, it kicks off a couple of things in BIM 360. First off, it actually copies that package to the shared folder that I showed you briefly earlier. We're going to take another look at that in a minute. It also displays the package on your swim lane for other teams to see. So this is when you're exposing the data for use by other teams. And so you click on the share button, and that's all you have to do. At that point, you would see it, for your team, this filled in. Actually, I think this will show it. Yeah, so this shows I have shared this package with other teams. Other teams will look at, let's see if I've got a slide that shows that. Nope. Other teams will look, when they see this on the architect swim lane, if I was logged in as, say, a structural engineer or an MEP contractor, what I would see on the architect swim lane would be an open circle at this point where nothing had been before, telling me that there's a package ready to be consumed if I want to. But again, in addition to displaying that on the swim lane, it also copies the Revit model to the discipline or the teams folder under the shared folder. All other teams have access to these folders. They don't have edit permissions to these folders, but they have view permissions. So this now is available to be linked by another team into their project. Okay, so by copying it to the shared folder, we're giving them immediate access to it. And a little side note here, notice this one is version 1. So why the discrepancy there, I don't know. Just remember, version in one folder is going to be different from a version in another folder. Okay, so once that happens then, this other member of the project, in this case the structural engineer, is going to link into Revit from the shared folder, right? So they're choosing to link it from the shared folder, so here's what will happen. If it's in the swim lane, they will see, yes, the architect or some other team member in this case. You can actually hit these little chevrons here, and that'll expand it out so that you see each individual team. But basically, this is telling me that, hey, somebody shared some data here. Now, I don't have to do anything with it in design collaboration if I don't want to, because, again, that data is already in this shared folder without me doing anything else. So if I want to link from that shared folder, all I have to do is in Revit, go to the normal link tool, and if you're in a cloud collaborated project, Revit will automatically put you in your project folder. So you can see where it's put me here. I'm in my project folder, and here's that same shared folder, the architect's discipline folder underneath it, and I'm seeing the file that they shared. And so I can link that directly into my project. Okay, there's another way, though. So in this case, the MEP engineer is going to come at it a little bit differently. They're going to take a look at what's actually in that package to see if they're really ready for it yet. And if they are, they're going to consume the package and link from a different location. So in this case, again, this is where they've got the swim lane expanded out. So now you see, yes, specifically the architect shared something here, and then at some point later, the structural engineer shared something there. Well, I've got this guy selected, and I'm going to explore it just to see what's in there. I'm not doing anything with it, just looking at what's in there. And it takes me to the same viewer that we use for every other purpose in document management. And here I can click on objects and get their Revit properties. I can do things like, get path distance, in this case, travel path. Why an MEP engineer would be interested in that, I don't know. But there we have it. So again, you've got all the view capabilities, so you can see what's available for you and then decide, do you want to consume it? If you do, then you go ahead and click on the dot, click on the consume button, and that will then cause the file to be copied to your team's consume folder. So here's the MEP engineer's team folder. There's a consume folder underneath there. Now the architect's folder is there with their document, and that's where the MEP engineer is going to link it from. Excuse me. So we can link from two different places, consumed or shared. Why? Why two places? And when would I link from one versus the other? It really comes down to how you want your links to update. If you link from the shared folder, then anytime the architect, in this case, or whoever you're linking from, anytime that team shares that or publishes that project and shares it again, your link will automatically update, right? So when they do the share, right, it's going to copy a new version on top of this Medical Center RVT file. If you already had that linked into your project, your link just got updated because it overwrote this one. Didn't really overwrite it, but it's now the next version. If you don't want that, if you want to control when your links update, that's when you go to the consumed folder, because then the only time you're going to get an updated link is when you choose to consume that data again, and then it will copy it back into the consumed folder on top of the original. And then your link will update. So I'm a big fan, frankly, of going to the consumed folder. That way I have total control over when that data is consumed. The downside is you have to be watching to see when people have shared data. That means you've got to be proactive going into BIM 360 design, going into the design collaboration module and checking to see if anything's been shared recently. Little tip for you, you can subscribe to folders and get notifications when anything changes in a folder. So in the document management module here, you can click on the shared folder here and click on the little dot menu that'll appear on the right side and choose to subscribe to that folder. That way, whenever someone shares something, their data gets copied to that folder, you get a notification that something happened, and that at least tells you, hey, you may want to go up there and check. Just kind of a little reminder or something. Okay, so that's pretty much the design collaboration workflow. Let's take a real quick poll here. Alyssa, do you want to run the poll?
Yes, if you can all go through and answer what does BIM 360 design offer that BIM 360 team did not. And while you are submitting those, I will just encourage you, we're almost at the end of our presentation, go ahead and start submitting your questions now so we can get ahead of that. What do you often see is the answer to this, Matt?
I'm gonna hold off on that because I don't want to give it away.
You don't want to sway.
See what everybody else answers. Yeah, it's a test.
All right. Perfect. I'm gonna leave it open for another 10 seconds, and then we'll go ahead and push that out. So make sure you get your answer in. And we are pushing it.
Very good. People are listening. Either that or they did like me. Anytime all of the above is an answer, I typically tend to lean toward that. So whatever works. That's good.
All right,
okay,
back over to you.
Moving on. So again, we just went through really quickly how the design collaboration module and the cloud collaboration module work with BIM 360 design. But again, don't forget, it includes the document management module. And I find that people tend to kind of forget that and not really take advantage of what's there. As a matter of fact, at the recently completed Autodesk University, I taught a class this year on beyond BIM 360 design for architects and engineers, and again, subcontractors, contractors, et cetera, to show people what they already have that they may not be aware of that they can take advantage of if they're using BIM 360 design. And one of those is markups. So this is a full-blown document management capability. You can electronically mark up any of the views that you've published from your Revit model. Those markups can either be private or public, right? So you can choose how to save those. And you can take it even further. Instead of just doing a markup, you can, again, create an issue. And all you have to do to create an issue is you'd be looking at a document here. You click on the little issue button here, drop a push pin where the issue is, and notice it can include markups. Its status is automatically set to open. Give it a brief description. What you don't see, oh, you do see it right here. I've assigned this to a specific person with a due date. So when I save this issue, this person will get an email with a link that will take them right to this. And at that point, they can choose to answer it, ask questions, whatever. We can get a dialogue going back and forth that we can track. And at some point, once the issue is resolved, the person who created the issue can then choose to close it as resolved. So again, a real simple, basic functionality of document management that you can take advantage of. There's other things in document management as well. You can set up review workflows for more complex scenarios where you have to have multiple people involved in reviewing a series of documents. You can set that up, transmittals, et cetera. Okay, so let's talk about some troubleshooting, some common mistakes and errors that people get with BIM 360, and most of these are very, very easy to resolve. No access to BIM 360, right? So you're in Revit and you try to initiate cloud collaboration, it just comes back and says, nope, you don't have access to cloud collaboration. Or you go to log into a BIM 360 project and it doesn't let you do anything. That's probably because the BIM 360 design entitlement has not been assigned to you. So what happens with BIM 360 design is The contract manager for your subscription contract needs to assign that entitlement to specific users. Once you've got that assigned to you, you can collaborate on any BIM 360 design or BIM 360 team project, whether it's on your site or one that you've been invited to by someone else. But without that, you're going to get warnings that you can't access, you don't have any access to it. That's a pretty simple one. You may have access to it, but then when you go up to BIM 360, you don't see any projects. Or if you're in Revit, maybe you can go to BIM 360 and you can see the project, you can see the data that's in the project, but then when you go to Revit, you can't get to the project. You don't see it in Revit. But you don't get any errors, just you don't see the project. Well, that could be a couple of things. First off, you have to have been invited to the project, right? So you want to make sure that that's happened. And the way you do that is just go to the project in your web browser. Can you see it there? Okay, that means you've got BIM 360 design, you've been invited to the project. The next step then is what version of Revit are you using? The Revit version and the BIM 360 design project version have to be the same. In other words, if I'm using Revit 2020 and I upload the first Revit project to a BIM 360 design project, so I initialize cloud collaboration in Revit 2020 for the first time in a BIM 360 project, that establishes that BIM 360 project as a 2020 project. And if I'm running Revit 2019 or in a few months Revit 2021, I will not see that project from those versions of Revit. And if you think about it, if you're familiar with how Revit works, that makes sense. That prevents you from accidentally opening, say, an older version of a project or an older version Revit project in a newer version of Revit, saving it to that new version, and suddenly people that were working on it before can't open it anymore because Revit projects cannot be saved backwards, right? So it just prevents you from accidentally doing that. If you need to upgrade a project to the newest version, there is functionality in BIM 360 to upgrade an entire project from an earlier version to a later version. Okay, so you have access to the project, but you don't see any of the files in there. That could very well just be permissions. One of the mistakes I see people doing in BIM 360 design when they start working with permissions is they try to lock things down too much. I'm a big proponent of working with a fairly open scenario and then locking down only where I need to. And again, if I use BIM 360 design to set up the team permissions for me, most of the permissions are set, well, the permissions are set correctly and it's automated. So you don't typically run into these issues if you just let the software do the work for you. If you're going to be using any of the Autodesk Cloud services, I strongly recommend you go to this website and bookmark it, and also you can subscribe. So this particular website will show you the status of all of the cloud services, not just BIM 360 design, but others as well, the rendering services, et cetera, and tell you if there's any maintenance scheduled for those services as well, because typically when there's maintenance going on, they're disabled. You can subscribe to the services that you want to get notifications about with this button here, and that way you'll actually get an email notification telling you if service is degraded or if the service is unavailable or if there's maintenance coming up or something like that. So that pretty much brings us to the end of our short presentation here. Just want to review some key points. Remember, BIM 360 design is second generation. BIM 360 team is first generation. The biggest difference between the two is control, permissions, right? BIM 360 design includes document management and all of these other functions. I didn't really talk about the desktop connector, but that's something that allows you to, say, upload a drawing file or a non-cloud hosted central file. So a Revit project to say someone just sent you without putting it in BIM 360, you can upload that and you can still use the desktop connector here to link those into your project. So you can link drawing files and non-work shared files from BIM 360 into your cloud collaborated file. Basically what this does is sets up a virtual drive on your computer that is your BIM 360. We talked about the project setup process. briefly about the Revit Cloud collaboration, how that works, and then really the meat of this is the design collaboration workflow with creating packages, sharing the packages, consuming them, and then we also talked a little bit about markups and issues, basic document management functionality that you can take advantage of, and we just talked about troubleshooting as well. And with that, I'll go ahead and open it up for questions. Do we have any, Alyssa?
Perfect. We do have one from a guy named Ken, and it's, how do you keep people from inadvertently changing something after it has been fabricated when the designer and fabricator are working on the same model, cloud model?
I would probably not recommend that you do the design and fabrication model in the same model. I would think that it would be better to keep the fabrication model separate from the design intent model for a couple of reasons. First off, if you're working in those separate models, then the fabrication team can have their model in their team, and the design team can't even get to it to edit it. You can give them view permissions so that they can see what's in there, they can mark it up, that kind of thing, but not edit permissions. And that way you protect it from being inadvertently edited by the design team. The other reason is you've now got a record. You have the original design intent model, unadulterated, and then you have the actual fabrication model to show the relationship between the two. So I would do them in separate models altogether with different teams.
All right. Great answer, Matt. And I think we're going to go ahead and close out the webinar with that. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. For more information, visit our website, asti.com, and don't forget to click register for tomorrow's webinar with Justin Weatherby of eSub. We are excited to see you there. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.